welcome to the Advertising Hour with me, Scott Colner, and today my guest is Russell Nohelty. Russell, I find it difficult to know how to introduce you because you're an author, writer, podcaster, all-round creative. I'm very jealous, to be honest with you. And in a way, it's a great thing that I can't find a single way to introduce you. How would you introduce yourself?
I usually use I used to introduce myself a lot of different ways. Once I became a USA Today bestselling author, that's usually what I do first. So a USA Today bestselling author of fantasy and science fiction. And I also run a company called Wannabe Press and then a training academy called The Complete Creative. That kind of is the easiest way to, but I also own a Verizon dealership and I also edit books. And then I just do a whole bunch of stuff. It was used to be a kind of a hindrance for me to do all of these things, but they all kind of coalesced in making me more resilient and like my writing stronger. So I've learned to sort of to just love it, or at least to tolerate all of those other parts of myself. I certainly wouldn't go back and like spend my career doing quite the breadth of stuff now that I know what I'm doing. But I think doing the breadth of stuff really led me to the work that I'm meant to do now.
We might touch on that when we again, I'll probably reference your book quite a lot. As I was just saying before we started recording, I've been reading your book, and I'm actually this always sounds disingenuous just because I'm interviewing and speaking to you, but I'm really into your style of writing and really engaged with the book. I think it's a really interesting book in the way in which you manage, I guess, the communication of creativity and the process behind creativity, and then the commercial aspects. Which is why I've kind of tentatively named this podcast title Selling Out, kind of tongue-in-cheek. So, yeah, I guess that's one thing I am fascinated by, that balance that you've managed to find. Has it always been there in your life, the balance between business and creativity, or did you have to kind of learn the business skills as you got older and gain more experience?
Yeah, definitely. So my first couple companies were like pretty much abject failures. I had a couple of production companies, and I was a fashion photographer for a while, and like nothing really clicked. And I'm a big believer that in your 20s you should be able to dick around and do anything that you want, like as long as you're not hurting yourself, other people, and like you're able to subsist somehow. And I was able to basically just barely subsist somehow in my 20s while I was like dicking around and figuring out what I wanted to do. But by the time you hit 30, I really think like you have to have like a backup plan and like just be ready to like enter the workforce or do whatever you have to do. And so when I turned 30, I had no real skills except for well, not even sales. I didn't have sales skills. It's just that sales kind of allowed me to exist in them. Like people are always looking for salesmen, right? So I got a job at Aflac, which is sort of an insurance company in America, and I then moved from there to like a car dealership advertising company, and then from there I finally landed at Sprint, which is a cell phone company. And then, from once I landed at Sprint, it took me about 6 months, but I really learned like the sales and marketing part of it. And I knew from my time doing companies that didn't work that the thing that wasn't working was the sales and marketing piece of it. So I was very conscious of wanting to make sure that, like when I started my next company, because I always knew there was going to be a next thing or a next thing I was going to do. Like I was working on just too much stuff. Like I didn't want to be at Sprint my whole life. I just wanted like to have enough time to figure out what I wanted to do and like set myself up. And so once I started doing the sales and marketing, really, that's when I integrated it with the creativity. So I've been a creative for a very long time before I sort of understood the sales and marketing process. And really, until I was able to utilize it effectively, it was still a couple more years out.
So before you learned some of those sales and marketing active kind of skills later in life, during your 20s and maybe early 30s there, when you speak on creativity, were you predominantly writing, or were there other elements of creativity that you were focused on?
Sure. So I wrote movies. I directed. I shot. I was a fashion photographer, so I shot stuff. I shot. I also was went to Denmark on a movie a couple of times. I not a couple of times, one time, and I just did a whole bunch of like generally. I was a general creative like human. I edited stuff. I shot movies and produced stuff. I was the executive producer of a television network for a while. And like I would then have to find new content, but also then like produce some stuff for them too. So it was a kind of just overall like creative kind of human trying to cobble together his life of like a bunch of different creative pursuits.
Yeah, but I'm guessing that means that it was difficult to sustain that lifestyle financially. Is that where the acumen started to come into commercial wise later in life?
Yeah, I mean, I had always had this idea that like if it was good, then like people would find it. I think most creatives have that thing, and it's just it's, wholly untrue for one. But it's hard to quantify how you learned that. So, but yeah, it went from doing that and like having a kind of 100 different like pieces of pie, like hand in a bunch of different pieces of pie, to I got in a car accident and like literally all I could do for 6 months was write. And that's when I really started focusing down on the writing part of it.
Ah, that's really interesting. And so, where did when you had to start learning the financial aspect, and I refer to it as financial literacy, but that's the common thread throughout all of your content, and you're very open about that aspect of your life. Where did you learn those skills? Was it self-taught? Was it just going through experience?
I mean, it was
resources?
through the ringer of all of the sales jobs that I had. I mean, so there's a couple of things that I've just taken with me, and that's like you have to do enough work. You have to do enough work in a day, in a week, and in a month to like have a randomly distributed like a bell curve of like that you can actually run data from. And so for me at Sprint, it was like you make 100 calls a day over a long enough period of time, like over a month time frame, you will find these data points. And like if you could be on the phone for 4 hours or more, like there was data points that you could like track. So I learned that very early on in my Sprint career, that like it's important to do enough work over a long enough period of time that you can like track the data. And then the other thing that I learned was that like what you did today was predictive of what happened 6 to 8 weeks from now. So it taught me to just be very consistent with it, so that I wouldn't have peaks and valleys. And I became the sales manager at that Sprint dealership. And what I would tell everyone was, what generally happens in sales is you have this trough, and then you have a bad month, and then you start sprinting. And then like 2 months later, you have a really good month, and then you take your foot off the gas, and you have then 2 months later, you have a really bad month. And then 2 months after that, you have a really good month, as you like have this really like peaks and valleys kind of thing. And if you can just go slower, slightly slower, or the same speed at all the time, then you will get further, because things will start stacking on each other, and good things will start stacking on each other. And I just found that the people that it worked for would just hustle and like work, and they didn't necessarily work harder than other people. They just worked more. Like some of these people worked way harder in their down months than like the people that just were consistently working were doing. But just by those people consistently working, they were like outperforming everybody else. And I mean, there's some other stuff about like objection handling and like optional closing and like how to talk to a client that just like clicks over time. But really the financial literacy became about like finding your key metrics and just like continually performing them every month, while most people will just like slow down.
So this is, I guess, a very broad question, but one that's coming to mind straight away for me is that why do you think for creatives it is so difficult to learn that financial literacy for other people then? Is it, I guess, number one, you said maybe hope. So maybe there are creative people out there that just assume they don't need to learn that part because they have a deep hope that someone will just find their work and that will mean they're settled for life? Or do you think maybe people fall into a trap of just believing they should solely focus on creativity and anything else would be detrimental to their art?
Well, I think that the biggest criminal thing that we do with creatives in school is we don't teach them entrepreneurship. We don't make it a thing that they have to learn or that they need to learn. I mean, frankly, like every artist who has ever graduated from art school, maybe not everyone, but the majority of them, if you're going into fine art or you're going to be selling your own work, like you are going to have to be an entrepreneur on some level. And yet, like, we do not teach entrepreneurship training for artists in school. Also think that entrepreneurship is by definition not set up for creative entrepreneurs. The general idea of entrepreneurship is you find a pain point and then like you exploit that pain point. If it's 401k sale, if it's like building a 401k or losing weight or like getting yourself out of debt, whatever that thing is, like there's a pain point that you need to exploit. And like, if you can just exploit it well enough, like you'll be successful. Creativity is not that. Like creativity is about like making some stuff and like weird stuff that like nobody really needs, but everyone desperately needs at the same time. But like, we're not selling something that has a pain point. We're like trying to bring beauty into the world. And that requires just a different kind of selling and a different kind of entrepreneurship. And I think there's this broken bridge between creatives who actually like are all entrepreneurs. Like there are not many people in film or television or music that are not entrepreneurs. Like, but we don't talk about their entrepreneurship because it's not the same as finding out how to make a better stool or like how to like create a P&L report or like all of those things are A, dreadfully boring and B, not really like relevant to creatives because like they're not in it for the money. They're in it for like they want to make money, but they're in it for the expression of their soul. Whereas generally entrepreneurship is like the people that love entrepreneurship love the idea of starting a company. Very rarely have I met an entrepreneur that actually is like devoted to whatever product they are selling. Like they are committed to the idea of entrepreneurship, but divested from what they're selling in some way. Whereas creativity is much different. We're very much invested in what we're selling and divested from like the maximization of profitability that often comes with entrepreneurship.
We'll go on to things like objection handling and also feedback maybe in a moment. That's a fascinating area which I took from your book. And you're completely right. Something that stands out to me as you're talking is that in school, perhaps they encourage children to be creative. But then if they want to take that creativity and turn it into a career, there are no next steps that are taught. And in some respects, and this wasn't a pre-planned plug, but I'm assuming that's where the complete creative and that course content comes from and maybe the desire to build that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I like to say that I'm not like a business human. What I am really is a translator. I take business concepts and then I translate it into something that a creative person can understand and get and actually implement. You know, because like there's a lot of business stuff that just like is irrelevant to creative people, but there is a lot that is good too. And you know, despite the problematic parts of J.K. Rowling, like there's a part that I just can't get away from like talking about, which is the Sword of Gryffindor. The Sword of Gryffindor is set up to be like it only takes in that which makes you stronger, and I love that concept, and that's what I try to bring to creative entrepreneurship. Is just these are the things that have made me stronger, and I think make creativity stronger. And I do believe that like structure helps you become more creative, not less creative. And so a lot of a lot of what I talk about in that book, in my other books, and on The Complete Creative is how to actually like build an audience that will love you. And then the ancillary byproduct is money, not the general like idea of what we're looking for is money.
And as we were touching on the subject of that aspect of learning elements of entrepreneurialism and applying it to a creative career, I will touch on that feedback. I'm going to I'm kind of going to skip through the conversation that I maybe had in my mind a little bit and how I thought this was going to go. But actually thinking about feedback, there's a really good section in your book. I've forgotten the title of it off the top of my head. Let me bring it up here. How to build your creative career. There's a really good section on how to kind of give feedback, but then also how to receive it and just how to take feedback when you're a creative, which obviously isn't taught in school. So the feedback system exists in a corporate environment. But when you just talked about it yourself, when you're creating something that's art and you're delivering it for a different, maybe emotional purpose, there's a different way to handle that feedback or handle that criticism. Can you maybe speak a little bit on the two perspectives? So how have you mastered it? I assume you get asked for feedback on art all the time, whatever that format is. Can you maybe speak a little bit on how you've started to master the art of giving feedback, if you have at all? And then also how you've trained yourself to receive feedback.
Sure. So as far as giving feedback, I mean, I'll be honest, like I don't give the feedback that I give is quite harsh. I tell people before they actually ask me for feedback if they like are sure. And I ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, like, how brutal do you want me to be? Yeah. There are some people who ask me for feedback who have already been through this conversation with, and I'm like, if you're coming to me for feedback, you know what I'm going to give you. And like, yep. But when what I try to do is I try to judge the product on the merit of that product to the market that they're trying to sell to, not how I like the product. So, if they're writing a cooking book, that's not a thing I have any interest in, but like I do understand that market and I can at least speak to whether I think that it's a good idea to bring that product to that market and like what the problems are. So I have a friend who's writing like a Christian fantasy book. And I'm like, you have to understand that like that market is so small. Like it's going to be so hard for you. And like, you're probably going to give up after a couple of books because you just can't do it. Like, it's just so hard. Like writing a book is hard enough, but then writing it to like a market that is as small as that community is, you're going to have a big problem. And so, I try not to trash the actual like writing itself because I think actually he's a good writer. He's just like marketing it he's thinking about the project in a way that like he cannot possibly hope to be successful. Honestly, like as a self-published person, it's just like, will he be successful? Possible, but like the odds are very small. And I try to make sure that when people come to me, I'm divorcing those two things. So most of the people that work with me are already like very good creatives. Like I don't need to like edit their work or things. And as long as I can see the objective quality of the work, I talk more about how I feel about their decisions and the problems, the strengths and the problems that I see with what they're doing. So that's kind of the general amount of feedback. If it's bad, I just like, I can't do bad. I just can't. Like, I can't, like, I can't work with somebody whose work is just like objectively bad and just needs to do more writing to get good at the thing that they're doing. I usually just tell them to have a good day, unless they're going to pay me to edit their work, which I beg them not to do. I do more on the marketing and sales part of it. As far as taking feedback, there's a couple of things. The first is you have to understand like who's giving you the feedback. So a fan giving you feedback is much different than your editor giving you feedback or a friend or family member giving you feedback. So an editor's job is to actually understand what's wrong with the book and be able to articulate what is wrong with the book. So like they're paying them not just for their expertise, but on like they're going to help you fix the problems in the book. A fan will probably say, I don't like how this character, I don't like how you're portraying this character. She's like changed so much from this book. Or like they'll be able to tell you like what the problem is, like what they don't like, but they can't help you fix it. And then like your friends or family, like all they're going to be able to say is like, yeah, I got bored in like the middle of the book, or like they're going to be able to give you vague feedback. And you have to be able to take that feedback and understand what to do with it. For instance, even your editor, someone who you're literally paying to help you with the book, does not mean you have to agree with all of her suggestions. You know, she's making a suggestion, but she doesn't know the world as much as you do. So like she might make a suggestion and be like, I'm not changing that. Like that's going to be important in 2 books. You don't know this is important in 2 books, but like it will be important in 2 books. And also the amount of feedback that you take from that person is going to be different. So like an editor, I take almost all of their feedback, like almost all of it. Like I just implement like blindly at this point, because I've been working with my editor for, 15 or so books. So, and then I have, like with the fans, I take maybe 10 to 20% of their feedback, like, because usually they're very good at that proofreading, and usually they're very good at like telling me general stuff, but like they don't have any idea of how to fix it. And then from friends and family, like I usually don't take any of their feedback except like a vague generality, because they're not like fans of the work, and they're not authors. They're just kind of like people who can tell you generally how things feel. But with all things, like your job is to only take in that which makes you stronger. And if you have an idea about something. So here's the thing is like at the end of the day, like we are entrepreneurs, so we are outsiders anyway. So if we believed in the way that things are done was working in the way, like we would probably be working at a job. So we're automatically sort of outside of the bounds of like what people believe is right. And so a lot of entrepreneurship is understanding what people are saying, what they mean, and then where you can break the rules. So, it's important to know all of the rules so that you can then break them when effective, and understand why you're breaking them, and understand what you're trying to solve by breaking that rule. And so your brain is going to work a little bit differently if you're a creative or if you're like an entrepreneur. And if you keep running up against the same problem, that's like, I don't like this because of this thing that you thought was going to be like the good thing, then like you probably need to recheck your taste. But like usually your gut is going to be like, no, I really believe this. I really believe that other thing. I really believe this is the way to go. And then a lot of it is trusting that gut, and then also hiring people and showing it to people whose gut you trust, and then like taking their feedback, some with a grain of salt and some with like a whole lot of reflection.
Yeah, you touched on several, I guess, streams of thought there as you were talking, but one from a creative standpoint, you mentioned trust quite a few times, and so I guess it's key over. You reference this in the book about the importance of networking and building up a network of peers and contemporaries over time that you do trust, that can give you feedback. And the other thing that I was thinking about when you were talking is that I guess the hardest thing in creative endeavors, in comparison to other aspects, or I guess I'm going to say normal jobs or other careers, is that you must get a lot more unsolicited feedback, so unprompted feedback. And so the more that you finish, which is another topic that I want to talk about, the more projects that you put out there into the world, the more unsolicited feedback you're going to receive. So I guess for yourself, over time, you might be getting, that becomes part of your day-to-day, getting that unsolicited feedback.
Yeah, I don't get that much unsolicited feedback except in reviews anymore. I get like people that don't like it, and I got way more unsolicited feedback when I was a newer author. I think there's something about just like being a USA Today bestselling author, or having dozens of projects, or like having a bunch of success, that like people either trust that you know what you're doing, or that like they don't need to give you that feedback. But I get a lot of reviews that are quite nasty, or like quite reverential, or quite like nice too, but also quite nasty. But I don't get as much feedback unless I ask for it. And I have set up my life so that like people know, do not give me feedback. like the book is done. Like I don't care what you have to say about it. Like not like little errors or something, but like I don't care like what you think of the book. Like I care what the people who read the last book and whether they like the book, because that's who I'm serving. But I really don't care if like Joe Schmo read the book and didn't like it. Like I care if people who have read my work before or people who read a lot of work in that genre like it. But yeah, I actually, unless I solicit it, which I sometimes do from like fans of specific genres, I don't get a lot of feedback, which is a blessing, but also possibly like a bit of a curse, because I don't get as many as robust amount of people like coming to me and telling me what they think. But on top of that, like I am very protective of my creative process. Like I believe, like I have a system. It has worked for me in the past. I know how to develop books. My books take 2 years or more to develop, and my series take 2 years or more to develop. And like by the time they come out, they're done. Like they're done. Like they're locked in stone. Like I have kicked through every possible option with these books, and like they are as good as I could possibly make them. And yeah, I think that there's something about having some success that like probably at a higher level, people do give a lot more unsolicited feedback. But I think aside from reviews, I get a couple of people who will email me typos, which I desperately appreciate. But otherwise, like they either say they just didn't like it or they hated it. In fact, I think in the last 6 months, I've only gotten one person who told me that they like who ripped into one of my books who was already in my fan base.
Oh wow, that's crazy, and also really, yeah, it's interesting that just that would even happen. I just can't imagine what would possess someone to go to that kind of length. Actually, something that's of interest to me as you're talking, it touches on something else I wanted to talk about anyway. Is if it's, I guess for some creatives, feedback and that loop of feedback might be what inspires them, or might be what creates them to work on new projects, or might give them a spark of idea. But you talk in the book that I was referencing about internal and external motivation. Maybe can you speak a little bit on your motivation and what keeps you inspired? I find that fascinating for someone that's doing so much.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that you're probably at the beginning of any creative career, the thing that drives people is the idea of like being Andy Warhol or being Stephen King or being Steven Spielberg or something. Like there's something about that aspirational part that like drives people. And I think that once you get into the work, you have to be internally motivated, which is you want to do the work for the sake of the work, that you love the work for the sake of the work, because the success isn't going to come very easily. And I think that's why most people drop off at the beginning. So, I mean, I am inspired to continue to work at this point because of the work itself. Like I want to tell the stories that I'm telling. I think that they need to be out there. I think that the fans that I have want them to be out there. And so I'm able to appreciate the work for the sake of the work. But yeah, like most people that I come across who are early in their career, their motivation is they think they're going to make a movie. Or like they're gonna like their book's gonna get turned into a movie immediately, or any of that stuff, and like all of that external motivation, like it has to fall away, and like you have to be willing to do the work for the sake of the work. And a lot of times I'll give up on a project because I don't care about the work enough. Like I don't care about the thing that I'm doing, or I'm not getting the results that I want from it, or whatever that thing is. And so yeah, I mean, you have to love something 100 and crazy %, because over the course of you making it, you're going to start hating it. And if you can't get to the end of the road of a book and still love it, there's no hope that book's going to be a success. Like I've done this a bunch of times, and with dozens of other people. And if you can't get to the end of the road and be like, I love this book, there is just no hope that book will be successful in the marketplace, because the amount of work that you have to do to make it successful is almost impossible to overcome, even if you love your work. If you don't love your work, it's definitely impossible, because you're not going to work hard enough to get it over that hump. So again, that internal motivation for the work itself is most of what propels the marketing afterwards, which is how you can tell if the project's going to be successful.
So would you recommend then, because this is a really tough thing to find the balance in, I think, would you recommend that when you're working on your first few creative projects for people that are earlier in their career, do you think it's more important that they finish the project as opposed to scrapping it midway, even if they're finding that they lose their passion for it? Or do you recommend that people just move on? Because that's such a difficult thing to find your way with, I think.
It's a really good question. And I understand that I am a little bit further in my career, so it's hard for me to think of the beginning of my career again. But if I were to go back, I would still tell myself to pick projects that you like but don't love, and genres that you like but don't love, and then learn what it takes to get the project to the end. Because again, the beginning of that career is all just like learning what it takes to be a creative human, and learning what it takes to make a project and seeing if you like it. So while I do think that at the end of towards the middle or beginning, middle of your career at least, you should get very good at abandoning projects. You at the start of your career should probably finish what you start, so you can at least see what the entire process looks like. And when I say finish, I don't mean finish that first draft. I mean really get it to completion, because that's when you're going to learn A, whether you want to keep doing the work, and B, like what it takes to get something to the place that you want it complete. And also it gives you the data of how long it takes you to make a work when you first start, so that you can work at doing it better in shorter amount of time. So yeah, I mean, I know I talk in the book about finishing things and how important it is to finish things, and I absolutely believe that. But you just don't have time once you start doing this as your job to do every project. You just don't have time. Like you have to, and you don't have the money to like put the right amount of money into every project. So it really behooves you to start thinking of things quite a bit differently, I suppose, and start to understand that the work is wonderful for the sake of the work. But if you want to make a living, you have to at least have a couple of projects that are going to be your bangers for the year, that like are going to return enough money for you to live. And if you want to take those chances on other projects, then you have every right to do so. But like you need those one or two products that are just, all right, every time I put up Cthulhu is hard to spell, it makes money. So like that's just a thing that I do now. And then to start developing other things in your spare time and in the spare amount of life that you have.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And from your perspective, I guess you're at a point in your career where it sounds like the joy of the process is what drives you and inspires you every day. And just speaking on that a little bit, could you just explain to me kind of what's inspiring you today as we speak? Is there a project that's in the works that you're just finding yourself kind of driven to get up and finish that particular project?
Well, I've just finished the 6th book in my Godsverse Chronicles, and I've got one more book to write before I kind of put that on the back burner to focus on my my new creative project that I've been developing for the last 2 years. And so, I can't talk about the project that's launching in January yet, but I can talk about the Godsverse Chronicles, and it's 6 books right now, and I'm about to start writing the 7th one at the beginning of August, and so I've got about 10 days to like hammer out all of the kinks in the series, in like what the next outline is going to look like for the next book. And in doing that, like I'll be honest, like my inspiration for doing that book is like a lot different now than it was before, and like my desire to now I'm inspired by the desire to just finish this universe and like bring it off, put it off in a bang, and like move on to the next thing. But at the beginning, it was this sort of creation process was was the reason that I was like excited, and like this is really the start of me becoming a professional novelist. Really started with like Katrina Hates the Dead, which is the first graphic novel in this like big universe. And so like being able to like tell more stories in it was amazing to me. The thing that I don't know if I work on inspiration now. I write mostly with compulsion. So I have very severe anxiety, and writing is the only thing that quells it. So anytime I'm not writing for more than a day or two, I get really antsy and jumpy. And so that becomes a much bigger motivation for me. I don't think, God, I hope that that most other people don't have to deal with that. But for me, I've been able to funnel that anxiety into a compulsion to write. And that writing then like is what keeps me going. And luckily, at least for the past 5 years, I've been able to make my living mostly from writing, with other things to supplement it. So as I mentioned, I have the Complete Creative Training Academy, and I also have a Verizon dealership which helps. But I make most of my money still on the process of writing, and the desire to not go back to a job really is the other thing that I don't know if it inspires me or motivates me. Like, I mean, as I mentioned, I'm inspired kind of by the work itself and just like getting better, and each series being better than the series before it, and making the connections to like keep the series going has become a kind of like a game of chess, and I've been quite enjoying the process.
I mean, there's again fascinating trains of thought there, and some good advice, particularly in terms of anxiety and how you can turn a negative into a positive with anxiety. I know everyone has their own coping mechanisms with anxiety. Do you ever? Sorry if it feels like an intrusive question, but I'm just curious. Are you constantly lining up the next project before completing? You said at the moment you're kind of on book. I think you said you're about to start book 7 of a series. Are you then lining up the next project for next year so that you don't let that anxiety creep in, and so you're constantly using it?
So what I try to do is I try to launch 4 times a year. I try to launch it in each season. Sometimes it doesn't quite work in each season. So I did January, which is my winter release. I did Cthulhu is Hard to Spell, which was in March. So it was kind of winter, kind of spring. And then I did the God's Verse, my summer slate in June, which is kind of was summer and like spring at the same time. Although, I mean, let's be honest. Like, I know that that spring ends on the 20th of March, and like summer ends on like the 20th of June. But like, I just have always thought that March was like spring and June was like summer. So I tend to do like those are the I did like the winter in January, and then I did the spring in March, and I did the summer in June, and then I'm doing the fall one in September. So I try to like keep that pretty consistent every year. I've not always done January ones. I've never done a June one before, but I was listening to Mark Jacobs do a masterclass, and he was talking about how he thinks of his career in seasons. And like, they have the development season, and they have the pre-launch season, and they had the launch of their line season. And I started thinking about my career like that as well, and it's been quite helpful. And so I try to, when I do a comic book, I try to have the entire arc drawn before I launch it. And when I do an anthology, I try to have the whole anthology put together before I launch it. And then when I do a novel launch, I try to have 4 books for each novel launch. So right now I am working, right now I have the launch for September done. We're working on the launch and I have the launch for January done. Well, mostly done, like 95% done, because I still have to get the book back from the proofreader, and then my wife has to read it. But pretty much those 2 done. Like, my part is done with those launches. And then my March launch next year. My artist is working on. He should be finished by November for that March launch, and then I finished my part for all three of those launches, and then I just sent the 6th book in the God's Verse to my editor, so I have to edit that book and get it off to my proofreader. And then the 4th book, so that's the 3rd book in my launch for next June. And then I'm going to start writing the 4th book of that launch in August. So by the end of this year, I should have completed all of my work that I have to be due for my 2021 releases until September. And that's when I will have written the 4th volume of Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter by then, which will be my next September release. And then I will start working on the January 2022 release. And then I already have the 2 books that I'm planning on doing in 2022 lined up. I just have to actually sort of get them all like situated and together and like ready to like I don't have most of the work for them, but I at least have the idea for them. And then I have most of my novel releases through January 2022 planned out on some fashion as well. So pretty much from now until January of 2022, I have an idea of what I'm doing. Now, things could change and things could break apart, and like certain launches could necessitate me doing other things. But based on where we were and where we are now, like I'm pretty confident that will be our release schedule for next year, and then for most of 2022. So 2023. So until January 2023, like I kind of know what my plan is going to be, and I just have to now execute it.
What stands out to me is the word discipline. And I know you touch again in the book on short and long-term planning. And there's a real element of business planning that comes through when you're talking about it's kind of taking that business plan approach to creativity and then having the discipline day on day to execute. And in the book, you talk about, and I assume you're eclipsing this at the moment, but you tell me, you talk about having a target of 1,000 words a day minimum. But maybe can you speak on your writing routine a little bit for me? I'm curious to know
sure.
what you're executing.
I write 5,000 words a day now.
Right. Wow.
So I try to write a book in a month. And so I can write a 60,000 word book in 1 month. A 90,000 word book takes me about 6 to 8 weeks to do, depending on the complexity. But yeah, I try to write 5,000 words a day, and then I do 3 edits of every book, and then it goes off to my editor, who comes back with 2 edits, and then it goes to my proofreader for 1 edit. And then I finish all of that, and then it goes to my wife for the final edit pass, and then it's ready for release. And so
I have to ask about your wife, because you mentioned that before. So she's the kind of the final gatekeeper.
Well, yeah, I mean, if only she enjoys the work, then like at least I have spent $1,000 wisely. Like if she's the only person who will ever read the book or like enjoy it, then like that's fine. But like she has to enjoy it. Like she has to love the series that I'm doing. And the thing that I know about this new series that I'm working on is like everybody who has read it has like said this is easily their favorite series that I've ever done, that they've ever read of mine. So I'm pretty confident that like as I'm going through this this world, that like I'm doing the right things, at least now. So yeah, I do feel like structure is quite important in my day and in my life.
And one thing I'm really curious about, and this could be a whole separate podcast, so feel free to keep it brief if you need to, but the creative process between writing and then handing over a copy, I guess, of that writing to an artist who then comes back and I assume has first drafts for you to work with. is it difficult being in a? I mean, are you an animator, a drawer, a sketcher yourself? Is that part of your creativity?
No, my creativity in that respect is to search vigorously for the right artist and then let them do their job. So if I've
Interesting.
hired appropriately, by the time I finish hiring, I've done 80% of the work that I have to do, because like the artist is now going to go and make something even better than what I could have imagined. I try not to think about budget, though I am budget conscious. What I'm looking for is the right artist who's going to bring their own stuff into the world that I'm living, that I'm setting up. And so I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find the right artist for a project. Like, well, whatever amount you think that I spend on it is probably 10 times more than that. I'm always looking for, like, I have a little sheet of like artists that I want to work on a project with, like, desperately. And then it might be 3-5 years before I do that. But with the process for Ichabod Jones Monster Hunter, our September launch, it literally will have been 10 years that I've been working with Renzo on this project.
Wow.
On and off. So I mean, you want to find somebody, just like hiring for a job, that like is going to be there, is going to bring more to it than you can bring yourself.
And I think the thing that fascinates me most is when you're writing, I assume that you have a vision in mind for what these universes, what these characters, what these creatures look like. And do you find yourself trying to look for an artist that can match that vision, or do you tend to kind of? And the reason I'm going on to this topic, do you tend to give them your point of view, or ask them to consider your point of view, your perspective, your taste, and then create something unique out of it? Where is that balance?
I mean, I'm looking for someone who can fulfill the vision that I have. And
Right.
I never ask them to do something that I have not seen them already do successfully.
Okay. Yeah.
I want them to, like, I don't want them to have to stretch them. I want them to stretch themselves artistically within the genre that I've set before them, but I don't want them to stretch themselves to do something that they can't do. So I send an outline sketch, like an outline, like character bio, and then like that's what they work on. And sometimes I have to like tell them a little bit, but usually I do very little as far as edits go, because like they have already nailed it. And if I've done my job right, then they've already nailed the work before I ever see it, because I've picked the person who is going to deliver the thing that I want, because I've seen their character designs already, like I've seen their comic books already. And Renzo was kind of a artist that I found without having this process, but now I definitely, like, I'm looking for an artist who can already fulfill my vision, not somebody I'm going to have to train to make my vision work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's actually quite inspiring for me to hear that. So I'm not a natural artist in terms of drawing or ability to sketch. And I've always found that a little bit, like, in my own mind, feel like restricting, and like I should focus on that area. And I guess all that I need to personally do is open up my mind to go and find people that can execute the vision really, really well and be prepared to pay for it if I ever need to. And I think that's maybe a really good lesson for anyone else that's listening to this. I think there's a tendency, maybe you can tell me, did you ever have that frustration that you had this vision and you just couldn't execute on it, and then you eventually realized that you needed to work harder on actually just finding the artist to work with as opposed to trying to do things yourself?
Honestly, no. Like I have drawn a book and I know the limitations. I always knew that my job was to find the right artist to fulfill the right vision for me, whether that is our logo or any other thing that we've ever done. It is all about finding the right artist who's going to do the thing that you want them to do, but do it in a way that is better than you ever envisioned. And I've always been willing to pay for that. I've been paying for that for a long, long time, whether it comes to the branding part of that or the comics part of that or the cover design part of that. And, even goes to my editorial. So like my editors, I've kept my same editor now I don't even know how many books, like so many books. She's edited just pretty much all of my books, except for with like 2 exceptions since 2000 and I don't know, 16 or 17. She's edited so many of my books that like I kind of don't have to check her edits very much. I just do the thing that she says. And same thing with the art. Like I check the art, I check the books, but like almost with very few exceptions, there are no notes that I have for their part of the process. And that is important to me because I have a lot of stuff to do and I cannot keep looking over their shoulder. Just can't do it. Like I can't and refuse to like look over their shoulder.
Well, that's a good thing. And we're going to come on to that in a moment in terms of all the other things you have to do, because we've spoken a lot on the creative process and your discipline, but there's also the element of marketing, which I want to touch on briefly. But before we do that, there's also a really interesting theme through the book that I've been reading, and you describe it as a point of view, and I think you've also described it as a taste, and I think they're similar things. But it's essentially completing projects and getting to the finish line on several projects, and eventually you'll find, and I think a lot of people might call this perspective, or they might call this tone, or they call this style, and you refer to it as point of view. And I'm just interested to know at this point in your career, I know this is a hard question, but do you think you can describe your point of view, your taste? What are people going to find when they find your work? What are they going to find?
Sure. So my work is all about how humans take up their own fate with the gods who are fickle and capricious in nature. So it follows usually quite normal people, or at least like not gods themselves, who are fighting against their own destiny and trying to like take their fate into their own hands. If you like, so I won't say there's an anti-capitalist message, but like the gods themselves kind of both represent the bourgeois of capitalism and the bourgeois of religion, and so humanity represents humanity, and so yeah, I believe that it takes a lot of work to plot your own destiny, but like if you take up your own hands, you have some control over it. And the gods that are in most of my books try desperately to not let the main characters live the life that they want to live. And that's also, the kings also do that. There's also clergy that do that like, but yeah, it's quite the like, if you had to, my point of view is that like screw the patriarchy and F capitalism, like, is kind of the thing that I'm trying to get across, I guess, really is that like other people are going to try and tell you what you can do. Like the world is going to hold you down in a million different ways. And the people who are more powerful than you and in charge are going to tell you that you can't do a thing. And almost always that is because of the fear of the power that you have, to that if more than just one person understands that they can take control of their own destiny, or like a community can form themselves and overthrow the means of oppression, then it becomes very dangerous for them. And many of the main characters in my books are quite dangerous characters because of that exact thing. And so the gods try as hard as they can to bring them down and hold them down and subjugate them and get them embroiled in busy work and things like that, so that like they have to like do the thing that like the gods are saying they should be doing instead of the thing that they want to do. If you take my like mascot, who's like a sarcastic, rebellious bee, you'll kind of see in like my point of view, the people who read my books tend to be like the punk kids and goth kids who used to sneak out of their parents' house to go to like clubs when they were in high school. yeah, that's kind of the good like ethos of like screw authority, moral majority down with authority, the kind of like Green Day message from American Idiot.
Yeah, there's a great bit of copy, and I wish I don't have it in front of me right now, but a great bit of copy on your website, Wannabe Press, where it says, Wannabe Press was built for the kind of the punks, the rebels, I think, and I just read that, and that really comes across through. And actually, I say this complimentary, but there's a kind of a chip on your shoulder type message that I got very early on in the book, and it is kind of anti-authority almost, or anti-capitalism kind of feel that I got very early. An interesting question, actually. Two questions here, a loaded question. Was there a project that was a turning point that helped you realize your point of view, and you were like,
yes,
this is it? Go for it. Go for that first.
Absolutely. Then. So there was a book that I wrote called Worst Thing in the Universe, which is launching on Amazon in the beginning of August, which solidified all of the things. Like it was the book that like really coalesced a lot of it. And in the raw nature, I think that the Godsverse Chronicles takes all of that rawness and like puts it into a story that is more easily digestible. And my new project puts it into an even more easily digestible thing, but like in its absolute raw form. Worst Thing in the Universe is narrated by God, and it's about karma and religion and capitalism and the patriarchy and all of that stuff in like a very, very, very raw, like a raw nerve form. And since then, it's kind of been like the guiding light of all of the other stuff that I've done over time.
And when were you creating that? When were you writing that?
I think I wrote that one in 2016. So it took 4 years to come out. It was my dad's favorite book before he died. So I knew I wrote it before 2017. So yeah, it was the 2016. I wrote that in 2017. I started working on the Godsverse Chronicles.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And so my next question was actually going to be, once you've reached that, I'm going to say a pinnacle or a point of view, and you've kind of solidified it, and I guess you have a eureka moment almost in your spirit. Does your point of view change after the completion of the project, or does it just reinforce it?
Oh, that's a good question. So I believe that when you finish a book, you suddenly have the idea of what you were trying to say. So for instance, the How to Build Your Creative Career, there's all sorts of ways to build your creative career and all sorts of ideas that I was throwing around. But when I finished that book, it forced me to cull a lot of ideas. It forced me to put certain spins on certain things, to rewrite certain things. And to like, once I finished with it, I was like, oh, this is what I think is important to build the creative career. And like, this is, if someone wanted to build a creative career, like this is what I would tell them to do. And the same thing with how to become a successful author, but also with a fiction book, like Worst Thing in the Universe, where like I finished it and I was like, oh, so that's how I feel about this stuff, huh? And I'd expressed it in certain moments before, but it never coalesced for me that like this is the stuff that I like talking about and doing it in like an entertaining way. So like the main character of the book is like the richest guy in the universe and the head of the biggest church, and also like a big D-bag, and karma just screws with him for like the whole book and like brings him down to like as low as you can possibly go, and like shows you that like all of these things that like he thought he was just like magically getting were just like a fluke of nature, and when he lost them, like it can hit anyone. And all of that stuff, like I said, it's narrated by God, so he's in heaven, and like one of the main characters like dies and goes to heaven, and then he's like, why was my life so horrible? And like God has to kind of justify his existence to like this guy. And it starts of being across like, is God the worst thing in the universe? Like it was all his creation, and all of these like interesting questions that it asks all kind of came from my head of stuff I've been dealing with from since I stopped really being a Catholic when I was 13 years old after I got confirmed, even though I still wear a cross. But I was able to then say, here it is. Like, here is the thesis of my life and my beliefs. And I better start being congruent with these things in the rest of my writing.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And yeah, so it sounds like it's had a massive influence on your schedule over these next 3 years and the other projects that you're continuing to, that you've worked on since.
That book is absolutely like the least commercial book that I will ever write. And the rest of my career from this is like, okay, so this is the starting point. Like, this is the thesis argument. How do I get people to actually read these books? And each kind of iteration of this is taking those ideas and making it more palatable for mainstream audience fans. And so, like, I think that, like, if you read Worst Thing in the Universe, you're going to be like, it's kind of like mainlining heroin. Like, it's a great book. Like, it's maybe the best book I've ever written, but like, it's a lot to take in. It's like, wow, like there are so many things and so much bitterness and anger, like on every single page towards these things. Like, I don't know who's going to read that book and then be like, and be ready to like go backwards. But I do think that like my job now is to kind of create a little funnel to be like, okay, so like, here's this new project. And then if you like that, here's the God's verse, which is a kind of raw, kind of thing. And then if you really want to get down to it, like Worst Thing in the Universe is like the most raw thing I've probably ever written. And like the most, like, you are like Russell Nohelty is a raw nerve. And if you get there, then like, and you like that, then like you probably will like anything that I do. But I have distilled it from its 200 proof down to like a 40 proof cocktail through like a process of iteration down into the different parts of the universe.
Yeah, that's the way I'm visualizing it. Actually, as you're speaking as a universe, it's like the point of view is the planet, for example, and all of these other books that you've been building since are the kind of visitors to the planet. They're the ways it's giving readers the ability to access the idea through different mediums, through different forms, through different stories. But ultimately, there's that one point of view right in the middle, which is the universe almost. That's a really interesting way that you've described that kind of process.
And I think that that is important for I mean, I know most people that listen to most shows are not like creators themselves in the same way of like my writing process, but I think it's the same as Simon Sinek talks about in Why First, or The Art of Why, or I forget what the TED Talk is that he like in 5 minutes talks about like getting the why as the main thing and then moving backwards. But also just like that book of The Complete Creative became the center of the universe in which everything moved out of. So The Complete Creative, how to build your creative career is the thesis argument that I expanded on at The Complete Creative. So The Complete Creative is based on mindset, creativity, and sales. And the three main tenets that come up in the how to build your creative career are how to get in the right mindset, how to create good stuff, how to sell that stuff. And then the courses that I offer are like how to build an audience from scratch, how to write a great novel, how to run a Kickstarter successfully. All of these things are tenets that go all the way back to the seed part of the universe. And when I do coaching, it relates to like those things. So like everything kind of funnels back into that core, and some people will call it a value ladder or like whatever it is. I think that like, so either way, whether you're talking about how to build your creative career being the nexus center for all of the other theories, or Worst Thing in the Universe being this sort of concentrated dose of my philosophy, and then transmutating it out further and further from the center. I do have that like sort of, here is the thesis argument. Like if you read How to Build Your Creative Career, you would be like, this is the thesis argument that Russell Nohelty is making. And he's had 4 more years of writing on the complete creative. And then he's had these very distilled moments where he's taken these concepts and drilled down in these courses to like this one concept. So like the core of how to build an audience from scratch is covered in How to Build a Rabid Fan Base. The core of how to launch products successfully is covered in my Kickstarter courses, and et cetera, how to like make a great novel is the core of like how to write, how to like make things better. And so all of these like drilled down moments are part of this overall universe of the complete creative. And I think it's a good model for any piece of advertising or any piece of content that you're going to, is what is your thesis argument? And writing is this beautiful thing that it'll tell you what your thesis argument is, because in the editing process and in just the creation of it, it's so hard to make a book and have it cogent and coherent and as a piece that you can give to somebody, that in making it, you kind of develop what your thesis argument is of your business or your writing career, or like whatever that other piece is that you can then expand out on.
Yeah, you used a beautiful description as you were talking, the transmutation of your thesis argument. That if there was ever anything that I've kind of stumbled across that would maybe describe your career and what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from you, transmutation of a thesis argument is just perfect. I might even title the podcast by that, because that's just an amazing description. So through, as you were talking there, you touched on, the creative element. You touched on discipline and finding your thesis argument and exploring your point of view. We haven't spoken so much about the sales aspect, but there are a couple of things that I am interested in before we close out this podcast today. And one aspect of what I'm interested in is you talk about continuously building a funnel. And just earlier, you were saying how much discipline you focus on writing and how you've got 3 years worth of kind of books planned. So how do you fit in the time for the marketing? And maybe can you speak on your process for maybe prioritizing your marketing activities?
Oh, I definitely don't prioritize my marketing activities. I prioritize my writing activities. So I am of two minds, and I think that any creative or any human who runs a business should be of two minds. The first is the business mind, who like handles all the business stuff. And then that business mind has an employee, and that employee is you. And that person is employed to do their creative work. And your job as a business person is to let your most important employee, you, do their creative work. And so when you have, everyone has sort of a 3 to 5 hour chunk of their day when they are the most creative. It might be, for me, it's 9 to 2. It might be 7 to 3. It might be 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. I don't know what the time is, but whatever it is, like that is your zone of genius time. And that is the time that needs to be quarantined off by your business human. And nothing that's non-creative or non-important to doing whatever work you do, whether it's plumbing or whatever that thing is, your business human is protective of whatever that like zone of genius time is. And its job is to then do all of the work in the other times and to keep the creative part of you free. So from 6 to 9 in the morning and from 5 to 7 at night, I like do my BS business things, whether that's answering emails or yada, 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 whatever that other stuff is. There's hundreds, taxes and lawyers and like all that other stuff. And I try very hard to not have anything interrupt that special time. Unless it's like right now we're talking and I just finished a book on Friday. So like I can do whatever I want until the beginning of this, Like my business brain person basically just gave my creative person like 2 weeks off, so like they can figure it out. They can figure out what the next step is. So I do the business stuff outside of creative time, and it's very much a different human. So that human's job is to find the idea, deliver the outline, have the marketing plan, and like then deliver it to creative human. And the minute that creative human is done with that editing that book, it goes back to business human, and business human's job is to market it, get the cover, do all the things, and get it ready for release. And business and creative human's job is to simply write the book. And that seems like a lot of effort to put into like one human, but like that 5 hours is the 5 hours that literally makes me all of my money. Because in those 5 hours, like I write the book, and the book is the only thing that like is the thing that gets me the money. So if I don't have the new book, I don't make the money. So I have to sort of keep these two things separate. And so I allow myself to do the business stuff when I'm not in that 9 to 2 or zone of genius time. And so 6 to 9 is like I go on to like a thing, and I look for new podcasts to be interviewed on, or like I do strategic partnerships, or I do meetings, like whatever the thing is. Like that's the thing I'm doing then, and that's the thing I'm doing from 5 to 7. And I try from 2 to 5 to like let myself recover, because that's my natural time to kind of recover from like whatever the exhausting day is. And so I feel like that structure is what allows me to do the marketing work, because the marketing work is finite. It only exists from 6 to 9 and 5 to 7. It does not exist the rest of my day, except during the next 2 weeks when I'm kind of like listlessly drifting, trying to figure out what the next project's outline is going to be. But even that doesn't happen in a specific time. It'll be like 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And then come August 1st, or I guess August 3rd, because August 1st is a Saturday and I don't work on the weekends. So come August 1st, my creative brain person has to be ready to like write again. And I'm again keeping that time sacred.
You might have answered one of my questions as you were talking. So prior to recording, we exchanged a couple of emails backwards and forwards, and you mentioned this was going to be one of the last podcasts you're recording for a little while. Is that because you're going into that creative process? And so I just happen to have caught you in this great 2-week period.
Do you want my honest answer?
Yes.
All right. So my honest answer is I spent about 100 hours doing 100 podcasts, and I did not see any return for that amount of money. Nearly not enough return for me to like warrant spending days of my week when I could be writing, doing podcasts. So I'll still do podcasts every now and then, but like I'm not going to have days devoted to podcasts because despite what people told me, like that was not effective for me. I did not see growth on the Complete Creative podcast. I did not see like, I met some very lovely podcasters like yourself. But like I'm spending today from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. doing nothing but podcasts. That's an entire day. And I have done it every week since March. And usually it's been 2 or 3 or 4 days of like literally just doing a podcast. And I have not seen the return on that. I have become a better speaker. I have become better at knowing the topics that I like to cover. I have been definitely know what topics I don't want to cover, but I just have not seen the return on the investment of time to justify me doing more of them and spending a lot of time doing them, unless I'm releasing a book or something like that. And then the podcast is focused on that part of it, which is like the book or the creative process or whatever that thing is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Again, thanks for being so open with your answer. And it's a really, you've given this, I can tell that you consider data in your decision making. And also I can tell that you're very disciplined and give things time. And if you haven't seen the return, as you said somewhere earlier in this conversation, there's a time to let things go. And maybe now it's the time to let that go. Just to close out this conversation, what I am curious about is I know that one aspect of building your funnel and also for sales was attendance at Comic Cons. And I'm assuming that a lot of those have been postponed or cancelled during the pandemic. So how has that affected you?
I mean, I lost 75% of my business overnight. It's never
It's
great.
really that serious. Wow.
Luckily, this was supposed to be the year that I was going to take it to the next level and like break $200,000 a year. And based upon the amount of money that I've made so far, I was probably on pace to do at least like 150, if not like 175 or 200 this year, if I had just like been able to do shows also. But luckily, I'd made this plan last year to do 4 launches this year and like make that a part of my business and do 4 Kickstarters a year. And like that has very much helped because I made, I think, $20,000 on Kickstarter last year, maybe $16,000. And I've made over $50,000 this year so far on Kickstarter because I did 3 additional launches. And so I was able to sort of recover all of those like lost convention sales. But with the convention sales, I'd have been like easily been my best year ever. But because I knew last year that I wanted to actually cut back conventions quite a bit, I decided that I was going to do more Kickstarter launches and sort of make that a part of just like make that an ongoing part of my business. And it's been very effective for me so far this year. I'm hoping that when we do our one in September for Ichabod Jones 2, we do another like 30 grand or something like that. And hopefully I can like hit that $80,000 threshold that I was trying to get to. And that will put us just about where we were last year. And that's crazy considering the year that we've had. But it's nice to know that like the plan would have worked. I'm trying now. The thing that I'm trying now is I've done a lot of lead gen Facebook advertising, but I've not done a lot of like sales, like conversion advertising to like actually make sales. And so I'm trying to now figure out how to take all of the stock that we have left and all of the books that we have and use them to convert into online sales in the same way that we used to use conventions as a way to burn inventory.
Yeah, that was really interesting. I'm sorry to hear that your business had suffered so terribly, and that was something that I'd assumed might have been the case, but I didn't know how bad that would have been for you. But it does also sound like the blessing in disguise is some of the other projects that you've been working on have enabled you to kind of at least match some of last year's activity. I'm assuming that means that for you over in the US, you can't wait for Comic Cons to come back, and that's going to be a really exciting time for you.
Well, yes and no. Like, we have not done anywhere near as good as anywhere in Europe as doing Comic Con. So, frankly, like I don't think they will come back to 2022. And I think that I will have a new normal by then where shows aren't going to be a big part of my career or my life. So I'm conflicted as to like, I want shows to come back because so many of my friends make money there. And I want shows to come back because like I'd like to do a couple. But as far as doing 30 or 40 shows, I'm hoping and I'm hopeful that I won't have to do that in the future.
Well, Russell, you have been such a fascinating person to talk to. The resilience comes across, the discipline, the entrepreneurialism, and the creativity. I've kind of been inspired and educated in equal measure. So thanks so much for taking the time out, particularly, as you said, because podcasts haven't been making a return for you. One thing I can say to you, if this is any silver lining at all, is that you do have a new customer in me, because I will be purchasing more books.
So wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience. I'll say, like, doing the podcast themselves have been wonderful because, like, I never felt like I had like a big podcast community before. Like, I didn't have a lot of friends in podcasting. Like, I'd never met a lot of like podcasters, despite the fact that I had done over 200 episodes. So the actual process of being on these shows has been lovely. With one exception, I've had an absolutely lovely time each time, and I do not fault the shows themselves for like whatever thing happened. Like it may have been just like I was picking bad shows that didn't resonate with the people or some one thing or another. But every single host that I had found has been absolutely lovely, yourself included. And I'm over the moon grateful that y'all would even have me on your show and like give me an hour of your guys' time to let me speak to your audience and yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. So on that note, can you just let my listeners, the listeners of this show, know how to find you?
Sure. So you can go to russellnohelty.com if you like magic, mythology, and monsters. And if you want to see sort of my musings from the last decade of being a creative, my podcast and all my free and paid courses are at thecompletecreative.com.
Wonderful. I'm just going to say thank you again for your time, and I'm going to wish you all the best for your projects for the rest of this year as well.
Thanks so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.